Roger Johnsen.
I think so. Last time I checked.
Well, tell me a bit about yourself and how long you've worked for DigiTech and things like that. Kind of let people know who you are and your history.
I would consider this my third stint with DigiTech, a total of about 18 years now. So,
We kind of leave and come back, don't we?
Yeah. Especially when you leave not on your own, on your own volition, based on corporate shenanigans, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I actually started in 1987, a few decades ago. Started while I was getting my degree in electrical engineering at the University of Utah, and needed a good part-time job. I was working at a maybe not so good part-time job, and in one of my classes at the U, the professor said, "Hey, we got this local company, DoD," and I had been aware of DoD for many years because of I owned some DoD pedals.
When you were aware of DoD, you were aware of the pedals. Did you realize they were actually in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, local music store, Progressive Music. In the late 70s, my bandmates and I would go down to Progressive Music and salivate over all the equipment there, and salivated over the DoD pedals and noticed on the box it said Salt Lake City, Utah.
And when you say bandmates, you're a guitar player too, right?
Yeah, if you can call it that. I'm mostly an engineer, and typically engineers don't have a whole lot of time
but
to
you've,
be
you've,
real
you've
guitarists.
played in bands, though. And
I guess you could say I've had international airplay.
Okay, you have to tell me about that. International airplay.
On the Dr. Demento show.
Yes! So the Dr. Demento show was my first introduction to punk rock. He would play punk rock songs on Dr. Demento. So tell me about the song.
Well, we think he played more than one of our songs, but the one that I heard him play was called Gumby and Pokey Ride Again. So it was just, it was a joke song. We were a joke band.
Do you have a copy of it?
I do. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get it because we're gonna have to play it. I'll have to see if I can do it as an insert on this interview.
You can find it on Spotify and Apple Music and all that.
Oh, that's cool.
If you actually want to, but usually people don't.
Sorry, I interrupted you. So
yeah, no problem. So we would go into Progressive Music and we'd look at the pedals and wish we had some. And I said to my bandmate, "Hey, they're in Salt Lake City. That'd be a cool company to work for." And that was probably, I would say, 1978, 79.
Wow.
And so kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And so in that digital signal processing class, the teacher, by the way, was the father of digital. He's known as the father of digital, Tom Stockham Jr.
Oh, yeah. That's John Stockham's dad.
Yep.
And John Stockham is a local vocalist.
Yes.
But yeah, so musical family, and the guy who actually invented digital recording.
Yeah, Tom Stockham Jr. had a local company called Soundstream, and they recorded the very first digital band recording. They recorded Fleetwood Mac.
That's so cool.
So, and he was an awesome teacher. He was a pioneer in digital audio.
People, sorry to interrupt, but people seem to think of, Utah and Salt Lake City as, their only musical touchstone here is the Osmonds. But, we have a pretty diverse and long musical history going back way, way, way back. So, there's a lot of rock and roll that came out of Salt Lake City.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that, and by the way, all of us here at DigiTech right now, we are all University of Utah graduates. And
I'm not a graduate, but
okay.
Most of us are. I went to the U, but I didn't graduate. I went on tour instead.
I could probably print you a certificate that you can hang on the wall. I'll forge it for you.
I attended the U for a short amount of time.
Yeah, so Jim Pennock as well, he took classes from Tom Stockham, and so they had a good history of teaching audio engineers digital signal processing.
That's super cool.
So, where were we? So I started as a part-time technician at night, fixing, and basically a production technician, fixing broken pedals as well as just testing pedals as they went through the production process. And shortly after I started, Jason Lamb started as well. So we hit it off. We had a common love for humor and surf rock, things like that. So we got along really well. I graduated in 1989 and took a full-time job with DoD, and I essentially took over for David DeFrancesco.
Oh.
So,
But you started on the floor, just like I did.
yep. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it's sometimes I explain to people that you kind of learn. It's OJT, right, on the job training. You learn from the very, very basics when you start at DigiTech. A lot of us did anyway, and move your way up.
Yeah, it was a really good background to be able to jump into engineering. So David left the company when the company was bought by some investors. His partner, John Johnson, stayed with the company. David left and went and started another company. David's last day was just before Christmas of 1988, and my first day as an engineer was the first day after the new year on 1989. So the next working business day, I took over for David D. and picked up some of his designs that he was working on and kind of carried the torch for the DoD brand for several years.
Yeah, that's great.
A little bit later, Jason, who was also working on the floor, we hired him in the engineering department as a technician and worked his way into an associate engineer position. And so he worked for me, and we were kind of the partners in crime.
The toxic twins.
Yeah. So he
Well,
was.
I would say it's more like the odd couple, though, because
Yeah,
I mean, Jason was a crazy punk rocker, and I mean, look at you, in
Yeah.
your Hawaiian shirt. I mean, you're
More conservative
quite
than
a bit more
Jason.
straight laced.
Yeah. But that was what was funny about it is a lot of these crazy ideas, people assumed they came from Jason, and they actually came from me.
Yep.
And Jason and I fed off each other, and he'd run into my office with a crazy idea, and I'd run into his office with a crazy idea. And so things like the gonculator or modulator, the meat box, the milk box, those were largely out of my brain. And Jason and I were very complimentary on what we came up with.
Well, let's dive into a little bit on that because recently Josh kind of lumped in a series of DoD pedals as being the Lamb series stuff, which is fine. It's a good way to categorize, a series of pedals. But the Lamb / Johnson series of pedals actually encompassed a lot more than just the ones that had funky names.
Yeah.
Because the classic fuzz came out during that period. I mean, the 747 and things like that. So some of the stuff that like the gonculator and the grunge are the more recognizable and iconic ones. But there was a whole slew of just kind of more meat and potato stuff that came out too.
Yeah, the first project I worked on as an engineer was the DFX-9, and then the 91 and the 94. We started on the DFX.
I still have my DFX-9. I love that thing.
Yeah,
love it.
It was a fun project. DFX6 and DFX7, the stereo chorus, stereo flanger, which actually never made it to market because we were dealing with through-hole technology that wouldn't fit in the chassis. There was too much circuitry, and so we had to shelve those products until later when we switched to surface mount technology and were able to do flangers.
And in fact, if you open up like a DFX-9 or something like that, and it's all through hole, it is packed to the rim.
I can tell you personally how packed it is. That took several iterations to pack all those components on that circuit board. It was a bear.
So even designing it now, if you're doing surface mount stuff, it would still be packed. I mean that was a pretty intense product.
Yeah, it was, and it was
DFX-91 in particular.
Yeah, it was the first one built on the HDC chip. That was a custom chip that we did. It was called the Happenin' Delay chip, and that was a great little chip that was used in a number of products.
So that was our very first. The HDSC was the very, very first custom DSP that DigiTech did.
Actually, that was the second one. The first one was the HISC, the Happenin' Instruction Set computer, and that was the brains with the allowed the DSP 128 to come out. So that was about 1987.
Yeah, I had a DSP 128 in my rack for a while.
Yeah,
that's another great box.
And the HDC was about 1989, early 1989 is when that came out. So,
So when you guys were naming the controls, I mean, I know, like you said already, it was for fun and stuff like that. But when you first started coming up with these names, what was the reaction from all the other folks that we had to work with? What I'm saying in specific are the people who were at a higher pay grade.
Yeah. So The first one was a grunge pedal, and I named those. Jason came up with the idea of the grunge, and I went to him and I said, we got to name the controls Loud Butt Face Grunge. And what I tried to do, so I named most of the crazy pedal names, knob names. What I tried to do is to come up with, first of all, the names had to make sense. They had to match what the function was.
What the control actually did.
But oftentimes, we would reorder the controls to read in a semi-coherent sentence, like ice cold deep freeze,
right.
Loud butt face grunge. That often determined the order of the control knobs.
Sorry, loud butt face grunge just makes me laugh every single time.
And much to my chagrin, at some point the corporate side of things got into it, and they said, "Oh, we can't name them that. That's offensive. Loud butt face grunge." I think of what's offensive today, and I kind of laugh.
Compared to what? Yeah. I mean. So I came on in 95 or 96. I can't quite remember, but I was part of the team that did the revamp. Switched over to the new foot switch, the captive battery lid, and the two-tone graphics. And one of the directives that we got when we were doing it was, we don't mind if you use the old labels, but make sure you add what the labels are actually doing. Because we had a lot of customers come back and say, we don't know what butt does.
Yeah.
But so I was part of that team that stomped all over your work, unfortunately.
Well, that was a better compromise than eliminating them
entirely
completely.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's I think that It kind of illustrates that DigiTech and DoD were run by a bunch of musicians, and while there was resistance and concern from the people who were higher up than us, it was still musicians and guitarists and stuff that were building this stuff. So we were building stuff for other guitar players, and our sense of humor was such that we would hope that other guitar players would find it funny. We weren't making like can openers here. We're making tools for other guitarists that shared our humor. I would like to think anyway. But I carried that on with the Carcosa. Naming the controls a little bit different, and we plan with the stuff we're working on right now to continue using fun names for the stuff. Should we talk about the poop one?
Well, if you want to.
No, no. I'm only going to say that. So Roger wanted to name one of the controls on a pedal we're working on, poop, and so to give you an idea that of where the resistance comes in, Roger was all for it, Mr. Straight Lace, and I was flipping out, saying no, it's not going to happen. So it's not going to happen.
But I have to give a lot of credit to my direct boss back in the day, Rob Urey. We had to kind of sell him on this grunge pedal idea, and he wasn't into grunge. He didn't know anything about the whole Seattle sound and all that, and Jason was totally into it. And so he's like, well, if you say so. He trusted Jason's ability to be plugged into the market, and so he let us run with that one, and it did really, really well. Yeah. And so from then on, he just kind of let us go.
That's so cool. Yeah. So the weird thing is during that period of DigiTech and DoD, there were a lot of changes and a lot of external pressures. And so, even though there was this undercurrent of underground and guitar players and potty humor and stuff like that, there were some pretty intense pressures from more corporate straight lace stuff. So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition when you think about it.
Yep.
We're kind of going back to our roots now with this new version of DigiTech and DoD. So hopefully we can avoid some of that corporate influence in the future.
Yeah, we don't have anybody turning down the creativity knob.
Well, except for me. So your last batch made me a little nervous. So,
but you just wait.
So why did you come back?
So I've come back twice.
This latest time, though.
Yeah, but the latest time, it was a no-brainer for me. I mean, I'd gone off and done. I consider this probably my 7th startup, and in between stints at Harman, I did different startups, and I was at a drone startup. But drones are really cool and all that, but this is really where my heart is. This is where I have fun, and I was missing that part of my life, and I had basically written it off. I mean, I'd written off that Samsung was going to do anything with these brands other than ignore it, and it's just not what they do.
Well, we after the buyout, we'd kind of been exposed to Samsung, and we not understood, but we saw what they were, right? And I was the same way. I was just like, there's just no way we're going to get any attention whatsoever.
Yeah. And so I just thought these brands are dead, and I just figured they'd never even take the time to lift a finger to extract the brands and make it available for somebody else. And so I was blown away to learn that Cortec had bought the brands. And so we immediately started talking with the Cortec guys and planted the seed that, hey, you really, to make this successful, you got to get the band back together.
Yeah.
So fortunately they did. They figured out a way to create a USA corporation, Utah-based corporation, and start the nucleus of getting the band back together. So
yeah, I think it's an amazing thing to me that we talked to Jim about this too, and you and I have talked about this, but we all came in skeptical of Cortec, and just because I wonder how much is PTSD. And I wonder how much is just inherent skepticism. But Cortec has been all for us doing our thing again. They've been very supportive about us getting right back into the saddle and getting stuff going. I think it's been amazing.
Yeah, let's just say I had a good job and no good reason to leave unless I had a good reason to leave.
Right there with you, brother. Right there with you.
So they made it worth our while to do this and gave us enough confidence that it's like, I'm on board. Let's go.
Well, speaking of let's go, so we are working on new stuff. We're, of course, not going to talk about anything in specific right now. But, you see the stuff online. People are not shy about telling us what pedals they would like us to work on and what products they'd like us to prioritize. So what in specific, pedal-wise, would you want to work on next?
Boy, I'm all over the map. Kid in a candy store. There's a lot of demand for those old pedals. Maybe not as interested in like reissuing an exact replica of what we did before, especially since there are a lot of things that we know that we can improve, mechanically and design-wise and sonically. But there's a lot of good sounds that we created in the past. We'd like to kind of utilize those in some of the
there's some ugly sounds we created too.
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with that.
Some people like ugly.
I'm thinking specifically the gonculator and stuff like that. I mean, that's we've never been shy about doing stuff that's out there either.
Yeah.
So nothing in specific, but I kind of like what you're saying about avoiding the reissue thing, because you know how I feel about the reissue word.
Yeah.
We're talking about updates and things like that.
Yeah. We have just a open slate, a wide palette of things to do. I mean, obviously, there's a ton of stuff we can do on the DigiTech side with digital things. I mean, we had some kind of ahead of the curve products like the IPB10 and the Stomp Shop and the iStomp, and really take those to the next level. Kind of finish the thing that we started. The plug got pulled on.
So a lot of those things feel like we've talked about this before. They feel like they're ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And not only ahead of their time, but also ahead of technology. If we had just waited a year or something, Bluetooth would have come along. So those products were kind of. I don't want to say stillborn or anything like that, but more like maybe there's something that can come of that with the latest technology that's interesting. Yeah. So I'm right there with you.
Yep.
Well, cool, man. Thank you for giving me some time on this, and hopefully we'll get some feedback and we can do a part 2.
Yeah, we'll do this again. Lots to talk about, lots of stories. So, and if people want to write in and say, hey, I want to know about this, or tell us about how this came about. Yeah, give us some ideas for some new interviews.
All right, thank you.